Welcome to Film Witch, a podcast with me, Sandy Settle, practicing pagan witch and tarot reader for over a decade and a big fan of films. Here I talk about movies, their intersections with witchcraft and femininity, and whatever else I have on my mind, which is usually a lot. Blessed be, come in and sit for a spell. And please rate and review me on Apple, follow me on YouTube and Spotify, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. It helps way more than you might realize, and it means everything to me. You can also find me on Instagram and on Letterboxd at FilmWitchPod. Please consider joining my Patreon, which is the best thing you can do to help this podcast continue. From 1999. In October of 1994, 3 student filmmakers disappeared in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, while shooting a documentary. A year later, their footage was found. Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Merrick's formative found footage masterpiece still chills to the bone. Oh, hello. Thanks for being here once again at Film Witch Pod. I today would like to talk about a horror movie that I have always loved. This has always been a 5-star experience for me every single time. I was super sheltered when I was growing up. I was raised Mormon. Not Mormon anymore, obviously. I stopped going to church, Mormon church, when I was around 16 years old. However, I didn't get to watch a lot of horror films until I was a young adult, because of that sheltered upbringing. So my horror education began in earnest in my 20s, and I did not watch this movie until around that time. I was probably in my mid-20s the first time I watched Blair Witch Project. I do remember, though, at a sleepover once, someone had a VHS tape of this, and I remember looking at it and thinking that it looked so scary. I have this memory of looking at the VHS tape, kind of like when you were young and you went to the VHS rental shop. Sorry, it's probably just the millennials and the Gen Xers can relate to this, but and you would just look at the tape boxes. I had a really small VHS rental shop close to where I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, across from the Sheets. Shout out to Sheets. And I spent a lot of time there just looking at VHS tapes that I knew I was not allowed to check out. And I remember distinctly the VHS cover for The Silence of the Lambs as well. And I was like, what the heck is that about? That one also sticks out in my mind. In any case, ever since the first time I saw Blair Witch Project, I was obsessed with it. To this day, I am obsessed with it. I think it is a perfect horror film. And I am totally baffled when people say they think this film is not scary. I think that is an insane thing to say, and I don't get it. Can I just say off the bat here at the beginning that I think people who don't think this movie is scary have never been in the woods in the evening before. They were raised in the city or something. Either that or they're just a fearless person who's totally unvanquishable and totally indestructible and immortal. And they're not afraid of the woods. Which, my hat off to you if you just think that you're fine in the woods and that you're going to wrestle a bear or something. I don't even know what to tell you. Anyway, being born and raised in the backwoods of Pennsylvania, in rural PA where it's just the woods, basically, that's where I was born. And behind my house was the woods, and I knew to be scared of nature. Unlike these 3 characters in this film, I knew to be afraid of nature. Some may know already, but this is often credited as the first major found footage film. There are a couple that predate it that are noteworthy in their own right, but this is the big one that kind of set off the whole craze of other people making their own found footage films for cheap. I think the you know, not just found footage, but also like a very low budget movie that could be made with a group of friends that is found footage and just open the door to like that possibility of a certain kind of horror indie film. But all told, you know, this film was not, I wouldn't call it a super cheap indie film, you know, like by indie standards, I would say they still spent quite a bit of money on this. If you're poor. American Sanchez, they got a fair amount of investors from pitching this film when they were trying to do pre-production on it, and therefore it was made for somewhere between 500 and 750K all told before the rights were sold. And that's almost $1 million. You know, that's $750,000 to make the film. So, you know, they didn't have no money. We'll put it that way. They did manage to get some investors. So I think that, you know, contributed to them having the resources they needed to make something that was convincing, right? Almost everything in the film is kind of implied, right? But there's a very solid atmosphere, and I think, you know, that it's not just them finding actors who seemed like real people and use their real names, but also, you know, the fact that they had enough money to make their film. You know what I mean? Though I will tell you later on what they did with one of the cameras that they used for this film. I was laughing about so much that they were talking about in the commentary. So most of the filming for this film was done in a place called Greenway Trail along Seneca Creek in Montgomery County, Maryland. I watched I watched the film 2 times for this episode. I watched it without the commentary, and I watched it with the commentary for a revisit. The last time I watched this, it was probably like 2 years ago, so I really wanted to kind of refresh myself. But in the commentary, they say, please don't go to Burkittsville and bother the townspeople there. Though I'm sure it's happened a million times since this film was made, but from their mouths, from the filmmakers' mouths, please be respectful of this area of Maryland where they shot this, because it's just like a tiny town and woods, but it's a perfect location for the mythology they came up with, and for, you know, the film itself. It's, I think, owes so much to them finding the right kind of woods, the right location for this to all unfold. In any case, when all was said and done, after this film had its viral marketing campaign and Artisan bought the rights, the film made almost $250 million at the box office, which is just like the gulf between 750K and $250 million is so extreme. I think we all aspire that our art can be that successful. The 3 principals in this film, I know Josh was hired because he had some experience with a camera, but they put out an open casting call for the 3 of them. So I think that's interesting. I always assumed, I think before I did my research, that they were like friends, you know, that they were just that Heather Donahue and the guys were friends of Eduardo and Daniels, and that they just made a film with them, you know. But they really did, you know, treat this whole. That's why I say I think this, you know, is elevated a little bit above like a super indie film. Like Kevin Smith's Clerks, for instance. You know, they did have like an okay amount of money, and they did kind of go through all like the channels to like make a film. They weren't just like shooting with their friends in their backyard. So, you know, there's this mythology of it being like a super indie film and making a huge amount of money. And it's not untrue, but I think it's also important to note, you know, that they approach this like very seriously as like a serious, you know, filmmaking endeavor. And I think that shows in the final product, you know. It's a well-made film. It's a very competent film. Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Merrick they did make this, or they came up with the idea for it while they were attending the University of Central Florida. So yeah, they were college students at the time. I love that they named their film company Haxan Films, which of course many of you will know is based on the documentary horror film made by Benjamin Christensen in 1922. It's a wonderful silent film that if you have not seen, you must go watch it right now. They did have a script, but the dialogue for the film was mostly improvised, which I think you can kind of tell, when you watch it, that they're just kind of being themselves. But yeah, I think that this is a great example of a really excellent film with improvised dialogue. Like that scene where Heather's sitting with the camera facing her in the tent and she's crying and giving her monologue. That was all Heather. She came up with all of that. And it wasn't, written in the script or anything. That was all her. So I love that. So at this point, I want to talk about a little bit beyond, how the film got made. In my notes, I just want to mention this so I don't forget to bring it up later. But so the edition I have of this film on physical media is the original Artisan DVD, and it has the Curse of the Blair Witch on it, which is as for a special feature. That's the documentary that they made prior to the release of the film, that was dropped on Sci-Fi, I think about a month before the wide release for Blair Witch Project. And it's ostensibly a mockumentary, but is played totally like it's a real documentary. At that time, there was still a viral marketing campaign, as many people know, to portray the film as though it was reality and not fiction. And they were totally all leaning into it. Everybody was playing along with this, and they managed to dupe a lot of people into believing that this was a real film. Or that this was real footage, rather, that had been found as the purported at the beginning of the film. That this is real footage and all of that. So they really leaned into this. There was like a website, and they did this documentary that was on Sci-Fi, and I did watch that for the first time. But yeah, I have this original DVD of this film, and I was watching it this time and I was thinking, there's no reason to ever buy this film in a better format. I can't imagine like investing in like a 4K of this film, I'm definitely, a person who's been buying 4Ks of my favorite films that I know would look really good in 4K. Like some films, like absolutely, that I've watched do look the best they've ever looked in 4K. It's definitely not true for all films. Like I watched the 4K for Alien last year. It looks incredible. They just released a 4K of Mario Bava's Black Sunday, La Maschera del Demonio, one of my favorite films ever, and it looks incredible. Wow, the blacks never looked so black. The shadows were never so deep. But yeah, not every film needs to be in 4K. And I would say, it's like I recently watched Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later. I know. I'm the last person in the world who hadn't seen that film. But I was like thinking the same thing with that, where I was like, imagine investing in a 4K of this. Like, it's just never going to look any better than the way it looks in its shittiest format, So I feel like the best way to watch Blair Witch Project is like on a VHS tape or maybe on a DVD, but like I can't even it can't even really justify like buying it on a Blu-ray, because like it's just not that kind of film. Like it's the shittier the quality, the better it's going to probably be as an experience. Like, and I feel the same way actually about all the Friday the 13th movies. Like this past summer, I watched Friday the 13th, the first one, for the first time on a VHS tape. And oh man, it hit so hard. I can't even describe to you how much harder that hits on a VHS tape. So yeah, I think that's probably the same when it comes to the Blair Witch Project. I have a DVD of this film and I have a VHS tape of this film, and I can't imagine ever investing in a higher format because it's just like never going to look that good. The shittiest it looks is probably the scariest. So yeah, I'm happy with my DVD and my VHS tape of the Blair Witch Project. I'm really obsessed with the opener of this film. I've always been obsessed with it. I think it's perfect. All the townspeople that they interview, most of them were it was actually a good mix. Some were actors, but most of them were just townspeople. I know one of the girls they interview is one of the filmmaker's sister. I know like the girl in the cafe is like literally was just a barista. The lady, my favorite, the lady with the little toddler girl named Ingrid, because she calls her Ingrid. I can't remember her name in real life, but she was just a woman that they met, and she just like kind of came up with all this stuff like off the top of her head, but she does it so convincingly in that scene. And her little girl who's like, no, 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 and like grabs her face. It's just like, it's so perfect. Oh, I love it so much. And then Mary Brown, this like extremely eccentric woman that they go to meet. That woman. They talk about her quite a bit on the commentary track. Her name was Patricia DeCoux, and she answered a casting call, I believe, that they had put out on their university campus for that role. And she like truly was as eccentric as she made this character seem in real life. And that scene where you hear Heather in the car talking about how she thinks she's a ballerina and she thinks she works for the Department of Homeland Security or something like that. Like that was all stuff that this woman, Patricia, actually told them about herself and believed about herself. So yeah, the line between the Mary Brown character and the woman who played her is extremely thin. That was fascinating. Absolutely loved the two guys fishing on the commentary. They said that was they were not related in real life, but the characters are supposed to be a father-in-law and a son-in-law. And I thought that was so much fun because you really see like these two actors. They were both actors for that scene. They just really like kind of portray this genuine rapport, and it just works really, really well. And I always feel like the beginning, that opener, works perfectly to set this stage for what happens later on in the film. It lulls you into a full sense of security for sure. I love stuff like that in horror films. One of my favorite things about this movie is that it's one of the best movies, in my opinion, about how scary the woods are. As I was talking about in the beginning, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and I grew up, with the woods behind my house, and really surrounded by the woods. Like we had neighbors, but everybody was kind of, it wasn't like a next door type of John, like in the suburbs. It was more like a house and then some woods, and then a house and then some woods. It's a little more spread out. So closest gas station was a 15-minute drive away. There's just nothing. I think I always understood on some fundamental gut level that you just don't really go out in the woods at night. It's just not a thing that you should do. It's super pitch dark. There's animals. It's just not a thing that you do, And I think that in the beginning of this film, you see kind of this portrayal of the way that Heather is, and she's just like really kind of headstrong about the whole thing. And they're treating it with a degree of flippancy, of that they're just going to make this documentary and everything's going to be fine, and despite all of these stories that they're being told about how people have disappeared up there and how it's dangerous and like there's these like creepy legends about it and everything, and they just, the way that they are confident that it's all made up and that it's not going to affect them, I think, but also just like the hubris of like going off into the woods and not being concerned about that. My husband and I went on hikes quite often when we were first dating. We haven't been doing that as much lately since we have a toddler, but we're planning on, getting back into that when she gets a little bit older. And it's something that we used to do quite a bit, and my husband used to do before he met me. And, I know there was, a few times for him where he got into some kind of like shady or difficult situations. But there was one, when we were dating and we were hiking sometimes together. There was this one time we went hiking. I've always been very kind of like careful about making sure that I have a backpack with like first aid stuff in it and like all kinds of like hiking gear and things like that. But and a wind up radio and all kinds of. I'm very like. I've been very thorough when it comes to making sure I have things with me. Probably because I don't know, I've always had like kind of this healthy fear of the wilderness, that I think is important to have if you're going to put yourself in a scenario where you're in the woods, just for your own safety. But he he used to kind of put the car key in the pocket of his jeans. And this particular time we realized, on our way back to the car, we'd been hiking around for a while and we realized that the key was missing from his pocket and we didn't have the car key. And we had just been hiking around the woods. So we were never ever going to find the key, it was gone forever. And we were like kind of in this, we were kind of like pretty far. This was when we still lived in the city. We were pretty far out, probably an hour outside of the city. And it was getting to be like evening and it was like late fall, so it was like, it had been nice during the day, but we weren't really dressed properly for the temperature drop. So it was getting colder and we were just kind of like sitting by the car trying to figure out the best thing to do. I remember we tried to call a locksmith to like let us into the car, and this locksmith that just like never showed up. And we're realizing that our phone batteries are getting quite low and, we're like, oh, we're going to like hitchhike over to the gas station to like try to charge our phones for a while. Like, what should we do? Because we're realizing that like the spot where the parking lot is for this hiking trail, there's just no streetlights or anything in this area. And it's getting like super dark. And we're like, even if, we call AAA or we call a locksmith or whatever, they're not going to be able to find us over here. It's going to be so dark. They're not even going to see us, like there's no lamps or anything. And I just remember this, this mounting feeling of like dread, like being like, I don't want to be like in the dark in the woods like this, like eventually we just were like, I'm like, I'm going to call a Lyft and hopefully they're going to come pick us up, even though they, we're an hour outside the city. We're going to ask them to like drive us to an address that's an hour away. We'll see if, they'll be willing to do that. Cause like a lot of times I feel like with Lyft drivers or whatever, like half an hour is kind of like usually the longest drive you have to do. But yeah, anyway, we got a Lyft to come and pick us up and drive us all the way back to the city. So it worked out okay. But yeah, it was scary. I remember, it was a scary situation. And it just was a good reminder, that like things can go wrong pretty easily, pretty quickly in the woods. And you can lose stuff, or you can be like not prepared, you could get lost like they do in this film. And the supernatural stuff in this to me is always kind of like an aside to like just the general fear of like being lost. And I always think that that's actually the scariest part of this film. The other stuff is great too, but yeah, it all compounds to like make this a really quite frightening experience that I really enjoy every single time I watched it. Yeah, but if you go hiking, please try to prepare as much as you can. Make sure you have a compass. Make sure you have water. Make sure you have one of those straws, the kinds that you can filter water with. They're really quite affordable now. I think they're like $20, but you can you buy it. You can just buy it online, and they're like a straw that you can like put into like a stream, in the woods and drink out of, because it filters the water through this water filter that's on it, so it makes it, it'll filter out debris and like bacteria and stuff and make it safe to drink. So yeah, get one of those, bring it with you. Don't just go off into the woods without any prep. And probably avoid woods if, there's like weird folk tales about a particular area. One of the best quotes from this movie is when they're lost. And Mike says to Heather at one point, I see why you like this video camera so much. It's not quite reality. It's like you can pretend everything's not quite the way it is. It works, this improvisation from him works really well in a myriad different ways. Like on one hand, I feel like, they're talking about the context of the film itself. they can almost pretend like they're not in such a dire situation of being lost and hunted and everything. You can pretend like everything's going fine. But on the other hand, I feel like it's a great kind of allusion to, the way in which the film is being made, and film itself as a medium, and how, everything can kind of be abstracted or obscured or funneled through a certain vision when it comes to the film medium. And I just think that's it's such a great all-encompassing quote about film, about why we enjoy films, or why filmmakers enjoy making films, and the ways in which art can abstract things that are too painful for us to confront in reality. We can confront them in films, and that's the whole impetus for horror as a genre, right? It's a safe way to explore our fears. So yeah, it's such a great quote. It's probably the best quote from this movie, my favorite. Another thing I really love about this film is how ambiguous it is. I really like everything, so many things being left to our imagination. I felt like when I was watching this commentary track, when I was watching the documentary that they did on Sci-Fi, I wouldn't say that I feel like it's something that you have to watch if you're a fan of this film. I kind of felt like it worked probably really well at the time when they were kind of trying to, pull the wool over everybody's eyes and convince everyone that it was real. Nowadays when you watch it, it's kind of cheesy because it's not. But yeah, I think actually, if you're going into it for the first time, for instance, if you're watching a Blair Witch Project for the first time, maybe don't watch that stuff, the mockumentary that they made and all this additional, stuff, and just watch it. Just watch the film itself, with as little backstory or anything as you can, and I really enjoy its ambiguity. Right, I think it's the better, especially in the beginning, as an experience when some things are left up to the imagination. You don't have to tell us everything, you don't even have to show us everything, not even most things. With horror, sometimes it's much better to kind of leave a lot up to the imagination and let the person, kind of come up with the things that frighten them personally. And I think this is a great example of that kind of film, where they're not constantly jump scaring us or trying to show us something that's frightening. It's more like the emotions that you feel as a human in a harsh and hostile world, that kind of concept. I think this film taps into that really, really well. But yeah, definitely, if you've never seen this film, obviously watch it on its own merits. But then I think that the commentary track is quite fun for this. It's Daniel Merrick, Eduardo Sanchez, the filmmakers, and a bunch of the producers are included as well. So here's the part of my notes about the camera. One of the cameras they use is RCA High 8, and they according to the commentary, they bought it at a Circuit City. Those don't exist anymore, but it's like a Best Buy. They paid $500 for it, and they returned this $500 camera when they were done shooting with it, which is just so legendary, broke college student of them. Love that story. Was laughing a lot over that. So yeah, filmmakers, young broke filmmakers of today, take note. If you buy a camera for $500 from Best Buy, return it and get that $500 back when you're done shooting. There are lots of running jokes in this commentary about how little they were able to pay their three principals. So yeah, I think, Heather, Josh, and Mike have gone on the record quite a few times talking about how not only were they not really paid anything for this film, but they also, I know specifically Heather Donahue has talked at length in the years that followed, that she actually had quite a hard time getting jobs after this film. I think, the three of them, probably shared that experience from one degree to another, because they were, never really in much after this film. So that's like kind of an unfortunate thing about Blair Witch Project is you kind of like, hoped that maybe their careers would have been longer if they wanted them to be, or they had gotten, to see more of that $250 million paycheck when the film was released. But I know that they do conventions sometimes these days, so hopefully they're making a decent amount of money from that. I know a lot of, horror actors kind of make a living going from convention to convention these days, so I know for a fact that at least they have been doing that. And yeah, hope they get bread for it. Another thing that they talk about how great Heather was as an actor quite a bit in the commentary, but at one point, one of them compares her character to Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, which I thought was so fantastic, that she has this kind of like endless drive for the project, the way that he has this endless drive to, find this white whale, and that she can't be kind of dissuaded from it, no matter what. And even when it's too late, she has a hard time disconnecting from the project. I just thought it was like a kind of a great allusion to her character and the way that she approached it and like their perceptions of it. Yeah, she's so great in this. I love her in this. There's a line in the film that they say is something about Gilligan's Island when they're around the fire in the beginning of the towards the beginning of the film, when they're first, it's like their first night, I think. And the filmmaker said that this was ended up being the most expensive part of making this film because they had to get the rights. Yeah, that's just like a weird film thing, right? Where you're just like the most kind of banal shit. And at that point, if it were me, I kind of felt like I would just take it out and like replace it with something else. If it was going to cost too much money, But I guess they were willing to pay it, or they really wanted to keep it in there because they said it did end up being the most expensive part of the film to get the rights for that. I thought that was kind of wild. They mentioned several times how creepy it was to be in the woods at night for this film, which I think is worth mentioning because, yeah, the woods are fucking creepy at night. Even if you're just making a fictional horror film, it's still fucking creepy to be there. So, also, there's a scene where it's raining. I think it's like the second or third day that they're out in the woods, and they said it really did rain for about 24 hours straight for that scene. So yeah, it sounds awful. They said it was for like freezing cold and rainy for like a day and a night, basically. Oh, another fun thing from the commentary: there's a scene where Josh is wearing like this giant tooth necklace. It's like a big cat tooth or like a big shark tooth or something. They said he lost this necklace, this tooth necklace of his out in the woods, those Maryland woods somewhere, and they could not find it. So they said you can go out looking around in that part of the Maryland woods and see if you can find it and sell it for $1 million. So who knows, to this day, it might still be out there somewhere. So the original cut of this film was 2.5 hours long. And this was fascinating to me. They said there was one audience that saw this 2.5 hour cut of the film, and they were in Orlando at a certain theater. I can't remember if they said what theater or not, but yeah, they did this one showing in Orlando because they're Florida boys. And so, yeah, this 2.5 hour cut has actually been seen by an audience once. And maybe that might be a reason actually to invest in a 4K version of this, right? If there were different cuts of the film on the 4K. I know there's this infamous Sundance cut of the film that is slightly different from the final cut of the film. And I know a lot of people want it. And there's also this 2.5 hour cut of the film they showed in Orlando. So I think the Sundance cut is different from the 2.5 hour cut, which is different from the final cut. So maybe if they put out a 4K that had all the multiple different cuts of this film on it, that would be worth investing in. You wouldn't necessarily want to invest in this just for a higher quality version of this because it's just not a high quality, it's not shot in a high quality to begin with. So that's just kind of a superfluous thing to invest in. But yeah. But I would be interested in watching this Sundance cut that people talk about of this film. It's slightly different from the final cut. I think that would be cool just to see the differences. At the end of the film, oh no, it's not the end. There's that scene where they're in the tent and they hear like kids laughing outside the tent, and it's like real creepy. They said they recorded the sound of some neighbor kids that their sound guy recorded some of his neighbor kids just playing, and he recorded it, and that's the kids laughing, but it really spooked the actors in the tent. So that's like their genuine reaction, I think. Oh, there's also that scene where like their tent is being all like pushed around, so they like all run out of it and they're like screaming and running through the woods. And the art director for this film, his name is Rick Moreno. He Heather goes like, "What the fuck is that?" And like you don't see anything, you know, so your brain has to come up with like what the heck it is that she's seeing and what she's scared of. But in reality, their art director was running alongside the actors, and they said he had a white sheet over him and white pantyhose over his face. So I don't think they told them that he was going to do that. So she wasn't fired. That was a genuine reaction, I believe, from her for that scene. But it is funny to talk about. They said the supernatural goo on Josh's belongings was actually KY jelly. So there's that also. Oh, another thing I loved in the commentary was they said for the last 2 days of shooting, Josh had already left because he was done shooting his scenes. So it really was just Heather and Mike. And for Heather and Mike on it was the last 2 days. So they gave them the filmmakers only gave them a power bar and an apple, they said, to eat for each of those days. So they really were super hungry. They were tired and they were cold. So that's all like genuine kind of like feeling and sentiment and reaction from them for those scenes. Like they really were in like this heightened state of kind of like mild distress from being uncomfortable and being hungry. And I think it lends quite a lot to those performances because, yeah, like that scene where they're like talking about the foods that they would eat, they really are like super hungry in that scene. So I liked that. The little like after Josh disappears and Heather finds the little bundle with like blood in it and stuff. The filmmaker said that their teeth in there from one of their dentists gave them like some teeth to put in there. So that's why like they are like real human teeth in there. Just fun, cool little details, you know, that they didn't have to like find genuine things for, but they did go through the trouble of doing that. I love that with films, you know, where it's like something tangible. This is also from the commentary track. They said the framing of Heather's face in that scene of her infamous monologue was accidental. She had turned the camera on herself and thought that she had her full face in the frame, but it was actually, you know, kind of askew to the side, obscuring her mouth that way. So it was just one of those things that it turned out that way, that I think it turned out, you know, better than even was intended. And that whole monologue from her was something that she came up with. So yeah, it wasn't written dialogue for her. And to this day, it's one of the best scenes in the film. Towards the end of this film, when Heather and Mike come up on the house, their reaction is real. Their location scout had found the house, you know, I think maybe like a week or two prior. So they knew that the filmmakers knew that it was there. But for a lot of the shoot, you know, like the actors weren't kind of like told prior, like what they would be doing or what would be happening. You know, it was kind of it seems like it was a much more organic process where they were just like hoping that they would have genuine reactions to things. So when they came up on the house, they didn't know it was going to be there. But the filmmakers had found the house, and then they had like fixed up some of it and changed some things about it. There was a bunch of graffiti all over it. So they had to like go through the trouble of like removing all this graffiti on the walls. And they added like the little like children's handprints. I think they had like some kids, you know, that either one of they didn't really say like whose kids they were in the commentary track, but they had some kids come and like do handprints all over the walls, which they said the kids were having a blast doing. It looks creepy in the final product, but the kids putting their hands on the walls was actually a really fun day. Sounds like. Most of the end scene for this film was first take stuff. I think some of it was second unit, but yeah, it was a lot of it was just, you know, they got one take and they used it because it was so good. And I think that to this day, the way that the ending they chose, I think is perfect. I know there's like multiple ways they shot the ending with Mike, but I think the one where he's like doing the infamous Blair Witch facing the corner thing, I think is the best ending and the only true ending for this film, in my opinion. So, but yeah, chef's kiss of an ending, if you ask me. So a little bit more about this documentary called The Curse of the Blair Witch, this mockumentary that they made. It aired on Sci-Fi before the release of the film, and it was to give further credence to this rumor of the footage in the final product being real, you know, that someone had really found their like film footage and they really were missing and all this stuff. I don't know if I would recommend this mockumentary now necessarily. I did feel like it was kind of superfluous in the end, you know, like if you watch it now with the knowledge that all of it is fiction, but it is fun as a novelty. It does kind of create this whole mythology of this woman named Ellie Kedward. She was rumored to be a witch, and then the mythology is that she herself turns into the Blair Witch after being murdered, and that she's like this kind of reincarnation or a supernatural figure. Her name is actually an anagram, and it is based on Edward Kelly, who was a 16th century mystic. They do that again with another character in the Blair Witch mythology. The character called Rustin Parr, who is supposed to be the child murderer, is an anagram for Rasputin. So yeah, just interesting stuff that they came up with. That's fun if you're interested in the kind of like further mythology from the filmmakers, you know, for the backstory. There's a second mockumentary they produced. It's called Sticks and Stones, but I did not watch that one. I read there's a lot of overlap with the Curse of the Blair Witch mockumentary, and I don't really. It seems like it was all stuff that they created for the promotional material, and you know, to create kind of what is now credited as the first kind of viral marketing campaign for a film. Where they like created all this buzz in the weeks prior using the internet specifically to hype up everybody to go watch the film. It worked, and I know many films and creators have used this method since then, or in modern day jargon, influencers, right, have used the internet landscape to create a viral marketing campaign for something. So, but this is, you know, one of the first real early internet examples of that. And this, you know, all these two mockumentaries they made and the website that they made and all of this stuff is all part of that campaign. So it's interesting, you know, if you want to kind of do your own research regarding what exactly they did to make people believe that this, you know, had really happened and these people really were missing. You can see how they kind of set all that up. A little bit more about those allegations from the three principal leads, Donahue, Leonard, and Williams. So as late as 2024, they talked to Variety about how they have never been adequately compensated by Artisan or Lionsgate for their work on the original Blair Witch Project. And I do think that this is worth mentioning, you know, especially in the state of things now. It's early 2026 when I'm recording this. They talked about, living in poverty after the success, being barred from talking about the fact that they, were having a hard time making money and, weren't being paid while their film was wildly successful. They were, they didn't have many options. They had no proper union or legal representation when the film was being made. So, they weren't like SAG members or anything like that. So they couldn't, negotiate terms that were fair to them. They said in the summer of 1999, they received a quote unquote performance bump in the low five figures. They did eventually sue Artisan and reached a $300,000 settlement for each of them. So they also talked about regretting using their real identities later on. And it seems as though, when the film was being made, they were not really... it wasn't clear to them, the way in which their real identities were going to be used. So, though they've talked about this, but they've also talked about being proud of the movie and proud of their roles in it and their performances and everything. So it sounds like it was, one of those situations where it was painful for them for a while and they were not treated fairly. And that was maybe indicative of the time that the film was made in and the fact that, this kind of film was the way in which this film was made and the kind of art that it is was very new, right, in the filmscape. And, one would hope that these days that just simply wouldn't happen anymore. I'm sure it does sometimes, but that's why, that's why we have unions. That's why they're so important, et cetera, et cetera. They protect you as a worker, as a working class person. That's what unions are for, right? To protect workers. So, yeah. Who could have known, right? I think, if you put yourself in their shoes at the time, no way they could have known that, this little film that they were shooting in the woods was going to be so wildly successful. I don't think anyone would go into something like this assuming that it would be. And so it probably just wouldn't cross your mind to, draw up a contract with like good terms in case that happens or whatever. It's just one of those freak things. So, but I did want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that it's not something that the filmmakers talk about in the commentary track. And it's something that seems like has only, been openly discussed by the three leads in this film more recently. So I think it's worth discussing, mentioning, and acknowledging on their behalf. There's a quote on the Wikipedia that I think is really cool from the Library of Congress. And this was, I believe, released alongside its induction in 2017. It says, the Blair Witch Project established a new type of documentary, psychological horror genre. One of the key elements of the film's success was the creation of a rich, fictitious history, which has become the template for modern horror film screenplay writing. And it goes on here that a film critic named Michael Dodd has argued that the film is an embodiment of horror, modernizing its ability to be all-encompassing and expressing the fears of American society. And he noted that in an age where anyone can film whatever they like, horror needn't be a cinematic expression of what terrifies a cinemagoer. It can simply be the medium through which terrors captured by the average American can be showcased. That's why I would say that I think that this is one of the best horror films ever made. Not so much because of the supernatural witch elements of this. I do think that they lend more spookiness to the whole affair, but I think there's, there's always been kind of a deeper current of fear of the unknown and unknowable and malevolent forces in the world, and specifically the kind of indifference of nature, right, is maybe one of the scariest things about this film for me, and the most effective for me every single time. The indifference of nature and the fact that, you can easily kind of just perish out in the wilderness, and it doesn't care. And being cold and hungry in the dark in the wet woods is a nightmare scenario. It's terrifying. And if you don't believe me or you don't agree with me, be my guest, go camp out in the woods for several nights and then tell me that wasn't scary as fuck. So love you, Blair Witch Project. Think you're amazing, babe. Think you're spectacular. And I think we all aspire to make something as good as this film. And on that note, as above, so below, and peace out. Until next time. This podcast is produced by David Suttall. He also made the music.